I've been running a software development agency for 3 years, and one of the earlier projects that I took on, I made a massive blunder with. It cost me about 50% of the total project value that we had to refund to the client, and we ended up losing money on that project. It was extraordinarily painful, and it was, I would consider, I think, the largest failure we've had as a company to date. And I want to help other people avoid that, and so I just want to talk about what went wrong and how you can seriously avoid making these massive mistakes that are going to cost you a lot of money if you run anything in the development space. So whether you're a freelancer or a contractor or run an agency of your own, this kind of stuff will cost you a lot of money if you're not careful. We agreed to basically build out this project it was an MVP build. So one thing to note about MVPs, building minimum viable products, is you have to build everything from start to finish. So you start with nothing, you build everything, then you deploy it, you have to manage deployment, make sure it's all working, and overall managing such a long process includes a lot of surface area for things to go wrong. This particular project we basically took on, it had one feature set that we hadn't built before. We basically said, yeah, it's fine, we'll figure it out. We scoped out a timeline and we stuck to a fixed cost. So we did a fixed cost retainer. So we said, it's gonna be X per month, it's gonna take us Y number of months. And if it takes us longer than those number of months, unless you have changed the scope, we will not bill you for anything after that because it's our mess up, because it was meant to be Y months, and if it takes longer, that's our fault. That was the structure of the project. So it's essentially a fixed cost. The long story short was that one singular feature that we thought we could kind of figure out and whatever involved some background processes on mobile. And we were using React Native, and that turned out to be extraordinarily complex. The project dragged on for months after, and obviously I'm paying salaries and we're not getting paid for that extra work. So already, we basically lost all the profit that we had made on the project. And eventually I said, listen, I don't think we can figure this out. I'm so sorry. And we delivered 90% of the project that we had done, but obviously that missing 10% was still missing. The client came back and was obviously very infuriated, and basically they asked for 50% of their money back. Now bear in mind, we've already sunk more salaries into this than originally planned because it took way longer. The money we got paid for it wasn't proportional to the amount of time spent because it had dragged on beyond our scope timeline. And so we had basically lost all that money that we had earned during those initial months that were meant to be dedicated to the project. And we still had to pay 50% of the total project value back. Now, you can argue that's fair, you can argue it's not, but at the end of the day, what it came down to was the founder came to me and said, like, this is so ridiculous, blah, 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 and we want at least half back. And I said, listen, we built more than half of the app. We spent more than double the original timeline. We're already losing money here. We're not in a position where we can accommodate that kind of thing. But they kept pushing, and I essentially wanted to preserve some level of relationship with the founder. We did have a relationship, and I did respect them still, and it was a lose-lose situation. Nobody was happy. Lost money, they had lost money, that we had both lost time. It wasn't amazing, and so we eventually ended up agreeing to pay that back. We paid it back over a few months because we didn't have the money to pay it back all up front. But the big lesson there was basically to be very, very careful about the things that you take on when you agree to a scope. I think I see a lot of beginners who will basically say they can build anything out, and they will claim to be confident in building that thing. And it was a really painful mistake that cost me a lot of money, and I think it's cost other people a lot of money. And if it doesn't cost you money, it'll cost you some incredibly unhappy customers that will want to make your life a living hell. And I think it's always worth trying to preserve a relationship with a client and admitting your wrongdoings rather than trying to kind of like send them away and say, oh no, we still made most of the app, so we keep all the money. In the long run, there's no point doing that. If you make people unhappy, that word of mouth will get back around to you. The real lesson is just to avoid that in the first place and try and make sure that any scope you take on, you know how to do. And whatever you don't know how to do, be very upfront about not knowing how to do it and say, hey, listen, I want to charge you for this. Should we fail to do this, then you don't pay us. And that, I think, is something really important, because it basically, you have to take responsibility for your inability to complete something, right? There's a guy who's a part of DevLaunch, which is basically a boot camp that my company is running to help people set up their own companies, software companies. He had a client approach him and ask him to do some database optimization. And he said, this isn't my thing. I'm gonna bill you X per hour. I'm gonna figure it out. And if I don't figure it out, you don't pay me. But if I do, then obviously I'll send you the billable. I think that was one of the best approaches that he could have gone with in that situation, and it's absolutely what I suggest to basically everybody who is setting up a development. If you want to take on something that you haven't necessarily taken on before, sure, go for it, but give the guarantee that it works. And if it doesn't work, you don't get the money. And you shouldn't get the money. You shouldn't be billing for something that you haven't completed. Obviously in this situation, it was like a full app, and what we probably should have done is promise to build the stuff that we knew how to build, because we knew how to build pretty much all of it, and just left out that background functionality stuff that was incredibly kind of difficult because it also involved Bluetooth and different things like that. And we should have just said, listen, if we figure this out, we build this much on top. If we don't, I'm so sorry, but you don't have to pay for that because obviously that's out of scope. I wish I had done that. I really wish I had done that. And I learned that lesson the hard way. It was really painful. I never made that mistake again, obviously. Nowadays when we scope, we are much more careful about things. We pay attention to what we know and what we don't know, and whatever we don't know, we research thoroughly before we prepare a plan for it. And if it's something that we genuinely don't know, if we're using some kind of new framework or new technology that we really haven't touched, we won't claim to be 100% confident in it, and I will be very upfront about our limitations. And I really recommend that anybody who's in this space does the same, because there are so many people out there who will be completely dishonest. You ask any development company, I get 5 emails a day from development agencies saying, oh, we can help you out, outsource to us, whatever. I can promise you, if I ask them to do anything, they'll say yes. I can ask them to do Ruby, PHP, React Native, whatever it is, C, they will just say yes. They will just say yes, and they won't tell me what their limitations are. The result of that is I also don't trust them. When you're open about your limitations, people also trust you because they're like, okay, well, he's not just trying to bullshit because he knows his flaws and he's telling me those. It's an extraordinarily powerful sales tactic as well. Like, people trust you when you tell them your flaws. And so I really recommend being open about them. Anyway, that was a bit of a long-winded rant, but I think if you made it this far, and if you apply this learning, if you are somebody who works in this development space, I think that can be extraordinarily helpful. This was a painful project for us, and I hope other people don't have the same pain that we did. Obviously, it was one of the early projects. It was a learning experience. Anyway, if you've made it this far, I hope you took something from it. I hope you enjoyed. Comment if you have any questions, because I do try and read those, and I make videos every day. So I have plenty of opportunities to try and reply to those.